Morning all. A-level students across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are waking up this morning to their results after more than 2 years of schooling thrown into turmoil by COVID-19. Thousands of pupils are facing lower grades than last year when, of course, they were assessed by teachers. And competition for university places is expected to be fierce. But the Admissions Service, UCAS, says a record number of students are still expected to get onto their first choice courses. Scores of students also receiving their BTEC and T-level results as well. Who better, then, to speak to about all of this than the Education Secretary, James Cleverly. Mr Cleverly, great to have you in the programme. It's an awful moment. Sitting on days like this, I do go back to getting my own SYS results many, many years ago. How has it gone this year?
Well, look, firstly, I want to say huge congratulations to the students because, as you said in your introduction, they've experienced a really tumultuous couple of years and they've really worked hard to get to where they are at the moment. So we've got exam results that will be coming out later on this morning. The marking process has gone according to plan. The exam process has gone according to plan. There'll be, I think, lots of students, perhaps even the majority of students, able to get into their first choice institution. And so, we're feeling the plan that we put in place has, we believe, worked.
Waiting for results, of course, but just in terms of the broad outline of those results, I mean, we are seeing results coming down compared to where we were last year, significantly.
So Ofqual, we've been working very closely with, and the plan was always to get those grades back to the kind of levels that we were seeing before the pandemic. They were more generous, and I think that's legitimate, but they were more generous during the pandemic years. It was always the plan to get them back. That is going to be seen this year, so students might get slightly lower grades than perhaps they were expecting and that they were hoping. But as I say, I think we should see the majority of students get into the institutions they want to.
I suppose the question, and it's been a question that's been posed by a number of people, is whether or not this kind of educational cohort, the class of 2022, was the correct year in which to get grades back in line with kind of pre-pandemic levels. They have not sat an exam. Their studies have been completely crucified thanks to the pandemic and remote learning and so on. And we know that across the country, the impact of COVID differs depending on how much money is floating around in an area. So just justify the decision to kind of make this lot of students deal with it rather than next year.
Well, as you say, this group of students had a really tough time. That's why I congratulate them so much. And we put adaptations in place. So we made sure that the exams were fair. We gave greater spacing between the exams just in case students did contract COVID, which put pressure on the marking bodies, but they've stepped up to their responsibilities. But funnily enough, it was the students themselves who were most vocal in their desire to ensure that they had qualifications which were fair but robust and taken seriously both by institutions and employers. And whether it be A-levels or the new T-levels that are coming out this year or other vocational training, that's what we've achieved.
But just to return to the point about the disparity, I mean, FFT Education Data Lab that published in Times Educational Supplement earlier this year, there is a north-south split when it comes to education. Pupils in the North East missing 15.3% of lessons compared to just 11.6% of lessons lost in London. When there is such a marked and statistically significant regional disparity, why is it fair that we treat all pupils this year in the same fashion?
Well, the thing that we have got to do is get back to school-based teaching and exam-based assessment. This year, we've taken a step towards normality. We have still had mitigations in place. There are adaptations during the exam, and obviously we have injected a lot of money into making sure there's catch-up tuition, which will probably benefit the cohorts coming in after this one, to be fair. But nevertheless, this is what the teaching profession, this is what the students, this is what employers and institutions want. We've done it in a progressive and fair way. And I think today what we'll see is a lot of students getting into the institutions they want to get into, or into the apprenticeships, or into the jobs that they are going to be moving into.
We will return to discussing, I'm sure, the A-level results once we've got the data and we've had the chance to go through it. But could we just talk just in general terms about your approach to schools? I mean, pretty clearly there are incredible financial pressures on everyone at the moment, but particularly in the educational sector. We've seen teachers getting a much trumpeted pay rise, 5% for existing, 8% for new staff. But that money's coming out of existing budgets. We saw CPI getting to 10.1% yesterday. Isn't this now the time to say that we need to see a significant and serious expansion of our schools' budgets?
Well, what we have seen is a very significant expansion already. It's worth remembering that
per pupil spending is lower in real terms than it was in 2010.
Yeah, but what we have seen through this spending review period is a £7 billion uplift into the school's budget, £4 billion of that coming into this next academic year. We completely recognise there are cost pressures on schools. The majority of schools' budgets, of course, is staff pay, and the award that the school system received was in recognition that there was going to be an upturn in teacher pay.
But it's the schools that are going to have to pay for it. It's the schools that are going to have to pay for the increased energy bills. I mean, we've got a situation where 2 in 5 head teachers at the moment are suggesting that they will be forced to cut teaching staff in their schools in order to make the budgets work. So again, I ask you, we know that there's going to be an emergency budget come September, no matter whether it's Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. What would you need to see in that budget in terms of a pay rise, in terms of a rise in the budget for the DFE that would actually balance all this out?
Well, as I say, we got a very good settlement. We've got a generous settlement. The IFS, which holds the government to account very robustly, has said that they believe that the pay rises are affordable within the financial...
Just about affordable, but they do also warn that next year looks problematic.
Yeah, and that's why whoever wins has committed to have an emergency budget, and it wouldn't be right for me to preempt that. But we do recognise that there are cost pressures. We do recognise that school leadership is going to need to make some really important decisions about expenditure. But as I say, we had a good settlement during the SR period, and the IFS, who, as I say, hold us to account very robustly, has said they believe that these are affordable.
Yeah, and also pointing out that next year is going to be rather difficult. The problem is, of course, that all of these costs are coming and they continue to increase. As I say, we've got 2 in 5 head teachers saying they're looking at cutting staff. I just think that there are people genuinely questioning the Conservative Party's commitment to education. There have been 6 education secretaries since these A-level kids started secondary school. Justine Greening, Damien Hines, Gavin Williamson, Nadeem Zahawi, Michelle Donnellan, Blinken, you'll have missed her, and of course yourself. Only Gavin Williamson lasted longer than 2 years in post. Reassure me. In what way are the Conservatives committed to secondary education when you go through education secretaries?
Well, look, I can't be held accountable for the duration of my predecessors in their tenure. But what we can say is, this badge, the T-levels, this is about the increased commitment to really, really good quality vocational training. We've seen, as I say, that good SR settlement. We've seen an increase in the pay of starting teachers to attract the brightest and the best into an incredibly important profession. I've spoken with the heads of the teaching unions, the heads of academies, to thank them for the work that they've put in over these really, really tough times. We absolutely recognise that education unlocks benefit not just for the individuals but for society as a whole.
How many schools have had the COVID-compliant ventilation installed yet?
So I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but the point is that what we know that schools have shown a remarkable amount of resilience and adaptation. Children have been
back. Is it possible it's not very many at all?
Children have been back at school over the last couple of years. We've seen that we can have children in school being educated, being examined, keeping them safe and healthy. That's what schools have already shown themselves capable of doing. And you could.
How many schools have had the ventilation installed? That was promised months ago.
So the point we're saying is schools have demonstrated that they can teach, that students can learn, and they can do so safely in a COVID-safe way. They've shown they're already able to do that. That's what we want and expect them to do. And you can, and I know, you want to focus on this particular element, but the point I'm saying is schools have showed that they can teach students safely with the circumstances they've currently got.
I'm just wondering, with schools, looking unable to pay their fuel bills, whether come the winter time we will once again be asking schools to open windows in lieu of ventilation units that this government has promised.
Well, as I said, schools have already demonstrated that they can safely teach children within a COVID environment. We've seen that happen. That is why students have been at school, which is great. It's the best place for them to learn.
Indeed.
Which is why they have been able to sit exams, which is the best way of assessing how much they've learnt, and which is why today we are going to see hundreds of thousands of happy students getting into their first choice institutions and plenty of others going to great universities or apprenticeships or employment using Clearing or Clearing Plus or the other advice and assistance that's available to them.
Well, I'm sure the Head Teachers Union would, if you can, find an answer to that question about how many schools have had COVID-suitable ventilation installed. But can we just talk completely off topic, off your brief, I should say. We're about to see another set of rail strikes. Only 1 in 5 trains apparently running today. The RMT making it pretty clear that there needs to be a significant increase in the offer for their members. What is your view on the frequency of these strikes and indeed what they are asking for?
Well, we should remember that the rail unions are there to look after their members. And whether it's the current head of the rail union or Bob Crow in the past, they've done that very effectively. They've got a very, very good salary package. They have incredibly good, ridiculously good terms and conditions. And what they're doing through these strikes is they are disadvantaging people trying to get to work, trying to put food on the table, trying to keep a roof over their heads. I think Grant Shapps has made it absolutely clear that these strikes are unfair and completely inappropriate, and it's wrong that people are held hostage by the unions in this way.
I do also just want to quickly ask you about Liz Truss and her plans to cut tax. I mean, we've talked already about the IFS this morning and how diligent they can be. I mean, they've said this about Liz Truss policies, indeed of Mr Sunak as well. Hard to square the promises that both are making to cut taxes over the medium term with the absence of any specific measures to cut public spending. I mean, it does feel that the tax policy, which has been a big part of Liz Truss's campaign, isn't quite hitting the economists in the way that it's hitting the Conservative Party membership.
Well, Liz has made it absolutely clear that this is about stimulating economic growth. You grow the economy, you can take a slightly smaller slice of a slightly bigger pie, or hopefully a bigger pie. That's very, very well established economic theory. And frankly, what we have seen is growth in the UK economy not be as vibrant as we would like. That's what Liz is pursuing. It's a growth strategy. And if you don't have a plan for growth, you don't have a plan for government, is the point I would make. But ultimately today, I'm here with my education secretary hat on, and actually seeing this group of young people getting these results, moving forward into the world of work or higher education. These are the people that are going to help fuel that economic growth. And I congratulate them enormously for the hard work they've put in over the last couple of years.
But with your Cabinet Minister, senior member of government hat on, can we just talk about the cost of living crisis? And again, we saw yesterday CPI 10.1%, probably up to 13 by the end of the year. Incredible amounts of money being spent already on our energy. When you have a director of Ofgem resigning from their post because they feel that the Ombudsman is incapable of managing the situation, there's a fundamental problem with the way the market is working, isn't there?
Well, what we are seeing globally and the inflation that we're seeing right across Europe, across America, across the developed world, driven in large part by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is something, as I say, driven by an exceptional set of circumstances.
Specific to the UK, is Ofgem fit for purpose?
Well, look, I've not had a chance to read the full statement of the regulator. I saw the headline that they resigned, but I think, unsurprisingly, I was focusing very, very much on making sure the education system...
But unless you had concerns about Ofgem before you read that headline, I mean, do you have confidence in its ability to work as an organisation?
Well, I'm going to read properly the point that's made. I've been focusing, as have teachers, as have universities, as have Ofqual and UCAS and everyone involved in education, on this incredibly important point of the year. I've rather had my blinkers on, I have to confess, on this one, because it is so important. We had a plan. It seems that plan is working, and once we get through the today and next week, when the GCSE results have come out, I'll be able to focus more broadly on the full spectrum of events happening. But at the moment, my focus has been on the young people.
Mr. Cleverly, great to have you on. Thanks for being with us. Let's have a very quick look at what is making the papers, and we begin with The Times and its reporting that tens of thousands of school leavers could miss out on their first choice university, in part because of tough A-level grades, as according to The Times. The FT has word of inflation exceeding 10% for the first time in 10 years. Here's The Guardian. It says that 45 million people could find themselves in fuel poverty as a result of the cost of living crisis. The Daily Express warns of a shock rise to interest rates facing homeowners, describing ministers as being on a war footing. Let's get a little bit more now on the morning's exam results. A-levels out today. Dan Whitehead at the UCAS headquarters in Cheltenham for us this morning. I suspect there'll be quite a few calls being answered there today.
Yeah, it's around about 40 minutes or so before the phone lines open here at UCAS in Cheltenham. They are expecting in excess of 20,000 students to be contacting the clearing system. It's not just on the phones, which would be manned by the team behind me here. They are trained to chat to those students through Facebook Messenger, through Twitter and other social media channels. Of course, that's how everyone is getting in contact these days as they get their results. That nervous wait this morning to find out exactly how the students have done. And as you've been saying this morning, it's been an incredibly different year and a difficult couple of years for the students getting their results. These are the first students to have actually sat an exam since the 2019 exams pre-pandemic, but they've had an incredibly disruptive couple of years in terms of their learning, with having their GCSEs cancelled as well. So it's been a tough time for them, and we are expecting grades to be lower than last year, but hopefully higher than 2019. When the last time that those exams were sat. That's all part of a planned and managed transition to try and normalise the grades back to pre-pandemic levels. As I say, around 20,000 students expected to contact the team here. There are nearly 30,000 clearing spaces, and it's the job of the guys behind me who are getting set up on the phones here and on their computers to help those students not only find a place at university in the forthcoming year, but also they are trained to help them emotionally. This will be a difficult morning for many students. Some, of course, will be celebrating. One of the officials actually said that they get phone calls from students calling up to double check. They can't actually believe the results they've got. But because of the predictions of potentially lower top grades this year, there will be students who will be missing out on the places at perhaps some of the more established top grade universities, and they will be disappointed and looking at those options. So the phone lines open between 8 and 8:15 here at UCAS, and around 270 volunteers are getting ready to answer those inquiries, provide that emotional support and guide those young people about what their options will be for this September.
Dan, much more from you throughout the morning, I'm sure. For now, thanks very much indeed. Still look to come on the programme. We'll be speaking to the head of the RMT Union, there you see in the middle, Mick Lynch, as rail workers go on strike, breaking more travel chaos today and into the weekend. As students and their parents absorb A-level results, I'll be speaking to Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. And a little later on, we'll be heading back to Cheltenham, speaking to the Chief Executive of UCAS, as students are told to prepare themselves for lower grades. Now, rail, tube and bus passengers are set to face 4 days of travel misery as tens of thousands of workers stage another round of strikes. Well, similar to other walkouts we've seen this summer, 40,000 workers, including 20,000 from Network Rail, are expected to strike. Train operating companies across England, Wales and Scotland are set to be affected by the industrial action. It will continue into the weekend. Transport for London employees striking on Friday. RMT Union workers striking again on Saturday. Major disruption is, of course, expected across the network. To add a little bit of pain for London's commuters, 1,600 bus drivers, members of the Unite Union and employees of London United, they plan to strike on Friday and Saturday as well. Saba Chowdhury joins us now from London Euston at the picket line itself. Saba, I'm sure you've been speaking to some of those on the picket. What is it they're actually looking for?
Good morning, Neil. Well, more strikes, of course, the result of failed negotiations between trade unions and Network Rail. This is what they are talking about here. This is what they are striking for today. Tens of thousands of railway workers are striking from various different unions. We're talking RMT, the Unite Union, and 14 other train operators are striking today. And this is for things like better pay is what they want. They're saying increase better working conditions and also job security. There's equally another strike happening tomorrow, but this one is more London-centric, and this is going to be London Underground and London United bus drivers that will be striking. Now, we understand that about 20% of travel will be resumed, so there are significantly reduced services, but that's, of course, to be expected. And also, the strikes that we will be having today and tomorrow will spill into the following day as a result. Now, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has said that trade unions are hell-bent on causing misery amongst businesses, saying that it's having a significant knock-on effect onto things like the summer tourism trade in the capital. Meanwhile, the Secretary-General of the RMT, Mick Lynch, who is here at the picket line, is saying that the offer that they were given is just simply not good enough. It's not an improvement. And as a result, his union will not be accepting that offer. They are not going to be bullied or hoodwinked, he said, into accepting what is currently on the table. Now, this offer is one that Network Rail is saying is good and is fair, but that's clearly not what the unions, or most of the unions, are saying. Now, the general advice is to avoid travel if commuters can, but otherwise to check what other options are available.
Saba, many thanks indeed. And just a reminder, I will be soon speaking to the rail union boss, Mick Lynch, joining us from the picket lines. Now, Labour has accused the government of being asleep at the wheel after a director of Ofgem quit. Just talking about that with James Cleverly, in fact. Christine Farnish said the regulator was favouring businesses over consumers with a rule change that she says will lead to much higher bills. Responding to Christine Farnish's resignation, the energy regulator said this: due to the unprecedented energy crisis, Ofgem is having to make some incredibly difficult decisions where carefully balanced trade-offs are being weighed up all the time. But we always prioritise consumers' needs, both in the immediate and long term. The statement continues: the rest of the board decided a shorter recovery period for energy costs was in the best interests of consumers in the long term, by reducing the very real risk of suppliers going bust, which would then heap yet more costs onto bills and add unnecessary worry and concern at an already very difficult time. Some of the day's other headlines now, and we begin with some breaking news in the last hour. A 44-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the fatal stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran. The 87-year-old was killed in West London whilst riding a mobility scooter on Tuesday. The US government has said it will start talks with Taiwan about a possible trade deal. It follows extensive Chinese military drills in the region as Beijing steps up pressure on Taipei to accept its sovereignty claims. Officials in Ukraine say that 7 people have been killed after shelling in the city of Kharkiv, with at least 16 more injured. It comes as President Zelensky prepares to meet the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, along with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in the eastern city of Lviv later today. Grain exports and concerns about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant are expected to top the agenda. A Leeds University student has been sentenced to 34 years in prison in Saudi Arabia because of her activity on Twitter. Salma al-Shahab, a mother of 2, was detained earlier this year in January while on holiday for sharing posts about activism in the country. One of Britain's richest men has said he is serious about wanting to buy Manchester United. Businessman Sir Jim Ratcliffe already owns 2 football clubs, Nice in France and Lausanne Sport in Switzerland. He also owns a cycling team. It's reported that the club's current owners, the Glazer family, are considering selling a minority stake in the club. Now, with 2.5 weeks left before the new Prime Minister is elected, Sky News has carried out one of the biggest opinion polls of Conservative Party members with YouGov. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been finding out what the party expects from the next Prime Minister.
The battle for number 10, the main TV inquisition's now over. Over half the Conservative membership have actually voted. So what's the state of the race? Sky News has teamed up with YouGov to find out. And here it is. On the basis of this, Liz Truss will be heading into Downing Street on September the 6th. She has a commanding lead. 66% say that they would vote for her. 34% say they would vote for Rishi Sunak. Now, that's actually a slight tightening on a couple of weeks ago, but nothing like on the scale that Rishi Sunak would need to overtake Liz Truss in this contest. Let's look at what's happening underneath the bonnet. And those people who have already voted, which is about 6 in 10, 31% say they voted for Rishi Sunak, 68% say they voted for Liz Truss. So even bigger lead there for Liz Truss. What about people that haven't? Does Rishi Sunak have a chance? Well, he, amongst people who haven't yet voted, 29% say that they voted for him, 44% say they voted for Liz Truss. But look at this, 26% say they don't know. That needs over half of these people to go to Rishi Sunak's corner in order for him to have any kind of chance. The numbers just are so difficult at this stage. But what are the challenges that whoever takes over will face? This poll gave us some clues. The affection that this party has, the Conservative Party for Boris Johnson, evident in this. We asked, what if Boris Johnson was actually on the ballot paper and he wins by a landslide? 46% say they'd vote for him, 24% for Liz Truss, 23% for Rishi Sunak. This group of people, the Conservative Party, quite clear, they don't think Boris Johnson should have been slung out of number 10 at all in this poll. But what of the toxicity of this race? Lots of mudslinging. But has it rebounded on the membership? Well, the answer appears yes for a big minority. We asked whether Liz Truss should include Rishi Sunak in her cabinet. 52% say yes. But look at this. Over a third of the Conservative Party say that the man that took the Conservative Party and the government and the country through the pandemic and wanted to be Prime Minister should be left out of the next Prime Minister's cabinet. That's quite a degree of dislike, of hatred that the next Prime Minister is going to have to contend with, along with all the other challenges of the cost of living crisis. I think putting the Conservative Party back together is going to be very difficult for whoever enters number 10 on September the 6th.
Sam Coates there. Now, floods have left homes, businesses and streets underwater in parts of the UK as thunderstorms continue to batter the country. Thunderstorms continuing. Downpours, in fact, caused flooding inside London's Victoria Station and outside King's Cross. Downpours had hit the country earlier in the day. There you see the very regularly used gym of the Houses of Parliament flooded out there. People are, however, being urged to steer clear of about 40 beaches and swimming spots in England and Wales after the heavy rain overwhelmed sewage systems. The campaign group Surfers Against Sewage say that England's southwestern and southern coasts are the worst affected. Public outrage has certainly grown in recent years about raw and partially treated sewage being pumped into rivers and coastal waters. And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's have a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The right of your screen there, the way in which the national grid is making its power. 55% of it coming from gas this morning, 15% from nuclear. On the top left, you can see just how much warmer the planet is since records began, creeping up closer to 1.26. And there at the bottom left, total carbon dioxide emissions in millions of tonnes, if you can believe it. Time for us to have a quick check-in, see how the weather is looking. Welcome back. Big day for plenty of young people. A-level results out this morning. And speaking to the programme, the Education Secretary said the plan was always to get those grades back to their pre-pandemic level. James Cleverly did acknowledge it had been a difficult time for the current cohort, but said the government had put in measures to make sure these exams were fair.
The plan was always to get those grades back to the kind of levels that we were seeing before the pandemic. They were more generous, and I think that's legitimate, but they were more generous during the pandemic years. It was always the plan to get them back. That is going to be seen this year, so students might get slightly lower grades than perhaps they were expecting and that they were hoping. But as I say, I think we should see the majority of students get into the institutions they want to.
I suppose the question, and it's been a question that's been posed by a number of people, is whether or not this kind of educational cohort, the class of 2022, was the correct year in which to get grades back in line with kind of pre-pandemic levels. They have not sat an exam. Their studies have been completely crucified thanks to the pandemic and remote learning and so on. And we know that across the country, the impact of COVID differs depending on how much money is floating around in an area. So just justify the decision to kind of make this lot of students deal with it rather than next year.
Well, as you say, this group of students had a really tough time. That's why I congratulate them so much. And we put adaptations in place. So we made sure that the exams were fair. We gave greater spacing between the exams, just in case students did contract COVID, which put pressure on the marking bodies, but they've stepped up to their responsibilities. But funnily enough, it was the students themselves who were most vocal in their desire to ensure that they had qualifications which were fair but robust and taken seriously both by institutions and employers.
To discuss that and much more, as you can see, our political correspondent, Amanda UCAS, is here. Morning, Amanda. I mean, who'd be Education Secretary? Well, at the last count, 6 or 7 of them since 2017, but they've got a significant issue to deal with, and there will be criticism, and I was putting to Mr Cleverly there, the idea that the class of 2022 had to be the ones that had to deal with this grade, what would you call it, grade deflation?
Well, indeed. I mean, they really are the ones taking a hit. I mean, if you look back at it before COVID, the number of students getting the highest grade, there was a target of around 20%. That's now gone up to 45%. So as we heard from him there, he was unapologetic about the desire to kind of bring that down again. But as you say, this is the cohort that have been hit hardest by COVID, and they really are taking the hit from everyone else. He there insisted that students themselves want to see this grade deflation, as he put it. I guess that remains to be seen later on when we do start hearing from students beginning to get those results. Labour, though, have been very critical of the government's approach. I mean, they say this is a cohort who've been failed at every turn. The government still haven't got their act together to put a fair recovery plan in place. As you were saying, some parts of the country were much more affected by the COVID disruption than others. And there was this big tutoring programme that was put in place, but only 1 in 5 students have had access to that. Now, meanwhile, Mr Cleverly did acknowledge that there is a real pressure on school budgets as well, but said he wasn't going to preempt any budget by a future Prime Minister, which rather links us into the other story making the political headlines today, which is a warning from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, very respected think tank, and quite a sobering warning, suggesting that the tax-cutting plans of both of the leadership candidates are implausible, given the high rates of inflation that we're seeing. Yesterday, of course, we learnt that inflation had risen to 10.1% in July, a fresh 40-year high, on top of which there are new reports about the cost of living crisis impacting perhaps 2/3 of the country into fuel poverty. by the end of the year. Both candidates have kind of seized on this response. Mr Cleverly there really doubling down on Liz Truss's policies, saying she's going to stimulate economic recovery with these cuts, but Mr Sunak saying their analysis drives a coach and horses through her policy.
Well, we'll soon see, won't we? Amanda, for now, thank you. But let's stick with the A-level results out today. So many people on days like this just go, I'm so glad that I don't have to sit exams anymore. Someone, though, with I'm sure, a slightly different view. Rebecca Warren is head teacher at Mossbourne Community Academy in Hackney. Great to see you this morning. Are you as nervous as your students?
Absolutely. It feels as a head teacher that you take exams every year.
Well, do you know what? From my perspective, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago it was since I did mine, but yeah, it's certainly more than you. Certainly more than you. So how has it been looking for your kids this year? No one can deny that this particular educational cohort has been through the ringer in terms of the effect that COVID has had on their personal lives as well as their education. How are you thinking the results are going to go?
I think we'll have a jubilant year. I think the children will be excited to be here this morning. Nervous, of course. It's a rite of passage. They were extremely calm in the run-up to the exams. In fact, this year has been one of the calmest years I've seen in 27 years of teaching. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing them all sharply at 8 o'clock to receive their results.
So what then happens today? There will be, well, speaking to the Education Secretary earlier, I mean, he believes that the majority of people will still be able to get into their first choice establishment, but there will be those kids, young adults, I should say, you know, who miss out perhaps more considerably than they even expected possible, who then have to go into the clearing process. How do you help them at a time like this?
Well, it's about making sure that they feel supported, but they also feel empowered to make the decisions that are right for them and for their future. So the process of them deciding on a career pathway begins much earlier, as far back as in year 7, so to speak. But in terms of the handful of students that we'll have to help today, they will very much be given one-to-one support, scouring, looking at what is available for them and what is right for them. And then obviously giving them the independence to make the decisions that they are most comfortable with.
Rebecca, really quickly if we can, we asked the Education Secretary about ventilation, COVID ventilation going into schools this morning. He didn't seem to have much of an answer. Have you had anything from the government on this?
No, we haven't. In terms of ventilation, we're a very ventilated building, and a lot of our exams, the results will be given in a huge area. So that isn't something that I'm concerned about, but I've heard nothing from the DfE about it.
Oh, well, look, Rebecca, we will get you on. You have a very, very busy day. I'll keep my fingers crossed for all your kids. Rebecca Warren, thanks so much for being with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care. But let's turn back to Afghanistan, as indeed we have all week. The Taliban promised a more moderate version of the brutal rule they imposed last time they ran the country in the 90s. But in the year since seizing back power, some of their actions have confirmed the worst fears of human rights activists. Joining us from Manchester is former Afghan family court judge Marziar Babarkhail, who fled Afghanistan in 2008. She stood for election as a Labour councillor in Oldham this year, but speaking to us in her own capacity. Marziar, great to see you this morning. You know firsthand just what the Taliban can be capable of. Tell us about your experiences at their hands.
Good morning. My experience with the Taliban is the worst experience. Like other refugees, they have the same. Twice they tried to kill me in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but I didn't did anything wrong. Just I stand for what I believe, and my work and my passion was not popular with the Taliban. That was the reason they tried to kill me.
So once again, we see the Taliban reverting to type. Back in 2001, when they entered Kabul, they did say that they would guarantee those rights that women had earned in the absence of the Taliban. What is your assessment of how Afghan women are treated currently? It does feel like we're right back to pre-2001 conditions.
I think when the Taliban retook Afghanistan, women's life across the country have been fundamentally changed. Their rights curtailed and freedom restricted by the Taliban. There is no hope for women in Afghanistan, and I think this is the death of our freedom of speech, the freedom of our work, the freedom of our life.
I mean, of course, you were a judge yourself in Afghanistan. I wonder if you've managed to keep in contact with any of your former colleagues. Some female judges clearly do still remain there, and I wonder how things are for them.
Yes, I'm in contact with my colleagues in Afghanistan. 80 judges left in Afghanistan in a very bad condition. Security, safety, and financially, they face with challenges. They're still in Afghanistan. It's very difficult for their children, for their husband, for them as well, because they're moving around. They have no safety, or there is no place to go and complain if you not feel safe in Afghanistan. This is a big problem for all the activists, for judges, for the people they work with the government. The Taliban searching for judges, and recently one of our female judge was passed away. We are not very sure. We have not more details, but it's very sad in our legal family.
Marzia Babakar Khan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate your time. But let's turn now to Asadullah Shinwari, who fled the Taliban's former regime as a teenager, later returned to work as a government advisor in the years after they were toppled in 2001, joining us from Leicester. Asadullah, good to see you this morning. What is your appraisal of the current situation in Afghanistan at the moment, the way in which the Taliban are operating, and indeed the kind of the humanitarian disaster that appears to be developing there right now?
Morning is such a nightmare. It's absolutely a nightmare. And I have to say this, it's not just for me, for every Afghan. And my heart goes to the people, the one who's got their families, and to all of those Afghans. I just feel devastated. There's nothing which is we could do now for them. The situation is getting worse, especially for female, the people who worked for the Afghan government before, for National Army, for the police, for the intelligence services, and also for ordinary Afghan people. There's still about 35 million people are stuck in there, and only a small fraction of them have managed to get out. But the worst part is just coming. It's been months and months the UN has been asking, there's going to be a humanitarian disaster and the world needs to help. But unfortunately, we as a country have been betrayed by the West and by the Americans, and it shouldn't have happened in the 21st century. And right now, after the war in Ukraine, people have forgot about Afghans, and it is not fair on Afghan people at all.
Asadullah, I'm really sorry, and we're going to have to leave the interview there, but we appreciate your time. We'll try and get you back on in future so we can continue this. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
But of course, one of the big stories of the day and indeed of the weekend, problems perhaps on the railways and elsewhere. But let's head to the picket lines of the latest round of strikes on our rail networks. Very pleased to say, joining us now, the RMT Secretary-General, Mick Lynch at London Euston. Mr Lynch, great to have you on the programme this morning. I wonder if you could start by just reminding our viewers the purposes of these strikes, what it would take for you to step away from the pickets?
Well, we've still got the issues at the start. The companies, Network Rail and the train operators, want to cut thousands of jobs from our industry, and we think that will have an impact on safety and obviously our members' future. They want to rip up our conditions of service. The train operating companies are also attacking our pensions, And of course, we haven't had a pay deal across much of the industry for 2 or 3 years. So our members are feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis, but they're also worried about their futures. We need to negotiate a settlement with 14 train operating companies and Network Rail. We're seeking to do that virtually every day of the week. But I think that the obstacle here at the moment is the stance of the Minister, Grant Shapps, and backed up by the Treasury. And I think that's got a bit wound up with the Conservative Party leadership process. So if we can get the companies negotiating freely without being shackled by the government, we can negotiate a settlement to this dispute and get the railways back to running fully.
I mean, you'll accept, I'm sure, that it is difficult for those of us who are not sitting around the negotiating table to judge what is being said by both sides. We're simply not in the room. So when the government say that the RMT, on behalf of their members, have rejected an 8% pay rise that wouldn't include compulsory redundancies, I mean, is that true or not? And if it is true, why the rejection?
So that is an offer for Network Rail, and it's at half of this dispute. On the train operating companies, we haven't had an offer at all. But it also means that we would have to accept massive changes to our members' working lives that at this time are unpalatable and unacceptable. The offer is also over 3 years. It's not an 8% offer for this year. We didn't get a pay deal last year. It's 4% this year and 4% next year. So it's 8% over 3 years. Inflation yesterday came out, the retail price index, as 12.3%. There are predictions for next year that it could be up to 15%. So what they're asking us to do is accept a gamble that next year our members might receive a quarter of the rate of inflation. And of course this year, when the deal should have been struck, it was 7.1%. So if you add those together, it could have been well over 22%, something in that region. And they're asking us to accept 8%. Yesterday there was a deal done on the bus services in the north at 11.1%. We've had a deal done in the aviation industry of 12 and 13% this week. So they're not offering us anything really. They're offering us a real-term pay cut and a pay cut against the rate of inflation. At this time, that's not acceptable to our people.
Sorry to interrupt there, but we're really pushed for time, and I just want to kind of drill down into this particular point. We saw CPI inflation at 10.1% yesterday. The expectation is that will rise to 13% by the end of the year. Who knows what it will do in the first 6 months of next year, but you could say, as a likelihood, it could go even higher. Does that mean that the RMT's negotiating position is directly linked to where inflation might be in the future or where it is now? I mean, if they were to offer you 10% this morning, would you take it?
Well, they're not going to offer me 10% this morning, so that's a hypothetical question.
But if they were.
You do get the point. You do get the point that if we were to accept 4% for this year and 4% for next year, our members would be poorer as a result of that deal. So the reference point that we use is the retail price index. Other people use the consumer's price index. What we've got to do is get a package, and it's not just about pay, it's about jobs. If you haven't got a job, you're not going to get a pay rise anyway. It's about the people's conditions of service, where they want them to work more unsocial hours than we're already working. They want them to change the way they work. And on the train operating companies, which is the majority of railway workers in this country, we haven't got a pay offer at all. And we haven't had one for 3 years. At the same time, they're threatening to close every booking office in this country and take all the guards off the trains. So Grant Shapps said that at the weekend, that he wants a guardless railway service. We can't accept any of that. So we've got some real difficulties to address, and we will do that with the help of the companies through negotiations.
Yeah, apologies for interrupting. We've literally got 2 minutes left in the programme. I do just want to try and squeeze in another couple of questions. I mean, in your mind, how close are we to a general strike?
Well, only the TUC can call a general strike. What we're seeing across the country, I addressed a meeting of thousands of people last night. I addressed a massive one in Glasgow on Tuesday. There is a wave of reaction amongst working people to the way they're being treated. People are getting poorer every day of the week. People can't pay their bills. They're getting treated despicably in the workplace. I think there will be generalised and synchronised action. It may not be in the traditional form, but we've seen the post office workers and BT. We've seen bus workers in London out on strike tomorrow and over the weekend. I think there is a massive response coming from working people because they're fed up with the way they're being treated.
It's starting to look a little bit like a general strike. Look, as things stand, quite clearly, I think people will understand you've got majority of public support on your side, and certainly the RMT and other unions are suggesting that you can afford to carry on striking for months. Do you accept, though, with the way inflation is going, there will come a point where whilst your members can afford you going on strike, the rest of the country can't afford you going on strike. Lower paid workers can't afford you going on strike.
Well, nobody can afford to go on strike. They don't want to be on strike. They want a settlement. But they are completely tied into this dispute. I addressed a meeting of thousands of our members last night online, and they are totally committed to the campaign that we've got. They understood the issues when they voted for it, and they're showing on the picket lines that they're completely committed to the cause. We will keep going until we get a negotiated settlement, and our members will decide whether it's acceptable or not.
Mick Lynch, we're just literally about to go into the commercial break, so I thank you for squeezing that answer in. We'll speak again.